Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see such a lively crowd at this point before Christmas. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Theresa Wise. I'm Chief Executive of the RTS, and I'm totally delighted to welcome you to this breakfast event with Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC. So in the next hour or so, Tim will be discussing the future of the media industry and the place of public service media, and in particular, the BBC within that. I shall then have the chance to explore some of the themes raised in Tim's speech with him, and we'll open to questions from you. Really looking forward to that. And before we invite Tim up, I just would like to invite Kate to roll a VT. Thank you.
It's really a lot of fake news. Сейчас на украинской территории.
Let's go.
Mr. BBC?
More bodies here.
Are they going to get past here? Are they going to get past you and these men?
How soon do you think it could be before there is real fighting here?
Guy just
Get in here!
Refugees are getting out of here, and so are we.
chaos here. People desperate to get on board. It's awful, and I just want to understand from you. I lived with parents in Sumy. They couldn't come with you.
Where were you at the exact time of the attack?
Are you not concerned that Russian officials will be tried for crimes against humanity?
What you read about what's happening on the ground.
And you're ready to pull the trigger on that gun. Why is that?
If that is what you think of him, how do you sit across the table to try to stop the war?
Live in 5, 4, 3.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out today. I want to talk 100 years and 23 days after the first broadcast of the BBC, and I want to talk about choices. Choices for us all. Choices that have profound consequences for our society. Its economic success, its cultural life, its democratic health. Our UK and its essence. Of what we hand to the next generation, of growth. Choices that concern not just the role of the BBC, but something a little bigger. About whether we want to leave a legacy of a thriving, world-leading UK media market, or accept on our watch a slow decline. Are we simply going to drift to the point where the emergence of vast US and Chinese players marginalise us, while we put on a very British brave face as they do so? Resigned to the fact that our culture and creative economy will inevitably be shaped by polarised platforms and overseas content? Or are we going to proactively take steps to ensure that we tell our own stories and remain the envy of the world? Today, I want to make a simple case. A case for growth and the choices as the UK to own it. Too much of this debate is painfully small. In BBC terms, we understandably fret about domestic issues, political spats, and latest headlines. And because people care, we keep busy on a joyous treadmill of flare-ups and debates. One of my favourite quotes of Lord Reith, and there's a few, is the BBC will never broadcast anything controversial and has no plans to do so. If only. But beyond the day-to-day, we urgently need to spend more time agreeing what we want to create that best serves our audiences, the economy and society. Today, I want to set out some of the choices that we need to make and make the case for ambition. This will require the BBC, regulators, politicians, all of us, to work together and make very clear decisions. To invest capital and set policy deliberately, not simply live on hope and good intent. To create a bigger creative sector, supported by strong public service media and a thriving BBC. In short, we have reached a defining decade for the future of this incredible sector and this wonderful country. But first, a quick look back. This year has shone a light on a venture 100 years old that has delivered outstanding shareholder returns. The BBC. It has not come about accidentally. It is a triumph of smart intervention and invention. An inspired choice by those early pioneers as they reflected on what really mattered in life after the scars of war. They decided, quite amazingly, that broadcasting was not simply about money. It was more important than that. It has led to immense returns to the UK public, economic growth, societal growth, personal growth, value for all. It's easy to forget what a remarkable story of success it is and how much of it we take as given. Of course, the BBC is not perfect. We make mistakes, we struggle, we commit acts of self-harm, and our funding mechanic, the licence fee, is positively described by some as the least worst option. But step back a bit from the noise and look at our legacy. There's the creative health of this nation. Ever since those early days in 1922, when 2LO crackled into life, we have backed our culture through an enlightened blend of smart public interventions, brilliant commercial companies, and inspirational individuals. At the heart of that ecosystem is the BBC. Critically, our universal brief means we do not simply look to maximise global efficiency and monetize a core audience. We support creativity in every part of the UK and its nations. Our work helps us understand each other and find communal stories that underpin our national life. 9 in 10 people say it's important for our media to reflect the lives of different people in the UK to each other. Simple. Then there's our creative industries, a world-leading economic powerhouse. 109 billion in annual GVA. That's bigger than life sciences, aerospace, automotive, oil and gas combined. If we get it right, we have the potential to more than double that by 2030, double it, growing way ahead of the wider economy and delivering jobs across the UK. Now, the BBC as a catalyst for this growth is proven. We support over 50,000 jobs, more than half outside London. We work with 14,000 suppliers. In Salford, the number of creative businesses has grown by 70% since the move there in 2010. In Cardiff, the creative sector has grown by over 50% since we opened Rothlock Studios in 2011. New analysis from PwC shows that increasing the BBC's footprint in an area by just 15% doubles the creative cluster growth rate. By 2028, the BBC's across the UK plans can create more than 4,500 new creative businesses outside London, along with 45,000 jobs. But the BBC's legacy is also about our democracy. We face a growing assault on truth and free reporting. Recent data on our watch is stark and shocking. In February, Freedom House in the US found that 60 countries suffered from democratic decline in 2021, while only 25 improved. Only around 20% of people now live in what are considered free countries. That's halved in 10 years. Journalism is now completely or partly blocked in 73% of countries. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt argues there are three forces that bind successful democracies: social capital, strong institutions, and shared stories. Not a bad list if you're in my job, by the way. He also believes that social media, while having many benefits, has weakened all three. It weakens political systems which are based on compromise, and it fuels mob dynamics that restrict a constructive process of dissent and debate. Our own research shows that's happening here too. Over 40% of people are now worried about sharing views with those who have a different view. Research by the European Broadcasting Union shows that well-funded public service broadcasters go hand in hand with democratic health. The greater their audience, the more citizens tend to trust each other. That is why the UK's strong global voice is so precious. Today, the BBC reaches nearly 500 million people weekly, a number that has been growing. We are the Britain's best-known cultural export. Quite something when you consider the competition, the music, monarchy. I could go on. In India, our services reach 70 million people in 9 local languages. In the US, the BBC is now the most trusted news source. When our Russian editor, Steve Rosenberg, interviewed Foreign Minister Lavrov, by the way, a must-watch if you haven't seen it, it got over 7 million views in Russia. So I think that if Reith was sitting here today, apart from giving me a withering stare, I think he would be amazed by what we have created together. These successes are the result of deliberate decision-making and difficult choices. There was the birth of TV in the 30s, the reshaping of radio in the 60s, when we said goodbye to the home service, the light programme and the third programme, the launch of BBC Online in the 90s, the launch of iPlayer in 2007, a moment that, in the words of Reed Hastings, blazed the trail for global streamers. Alongside these BBC moves, we've acted successfully as an industry. Freeview, FreeSat, digital TV switchover, DAB, radio player, YouView, all successful in developing our media sector, fostering competition, but also enhancing public service broadcasting. All these moments required a choice, a will, an optimism, and a generosity of vision, a desire to see the big picture. There are cautionary tales too. The infamous blocking of Project Kangaroo back in 2009 when the UK PSBs wanted to set up a streaming service. But overall, there is so much to be proud of in what we have created together. However, today, I believe we are in a period of real jeopardy. A life-threatening challenge to our local media and the cultural and social benefit they provide. Now, this is not an immediate crisis for audiences. The choice of high-quality TV and audio has never been better. The threat is not about if there is a choice. It is about the scope of future choice and what factors shape it. Do we want a US-style media market, or do we want to fight to grow something different based on our vision? Now, I read sometimes that the BBC needs to clock that the world has changed. I can assure you that we do not need convincing. The internet has stripped away the historical distribution advantage of having half of the TV channels or FM frequencies. Reith would be horrified by that, by the way. In this world, relevance, like trust, has to be earned. Industry analysts predict that we have probably seen the last year in the UK when broadcasters make up the majority of video viewing. 5 years ago, broadcast TV reached nearly 80% of young adults a week. Today, it's around 50%. And radical changes are happening across all age groups. TikTok is now bigger than the BBC in video for 16 to 24s in the UK. So today is the right time to ask the question, are we happy to let the global market simply take its course, or are we going to intervene to shape the UK market? Now, before looking to the future, let me just give a quick update on how the BBC is doing. We have been working on transformation rather than just managing decline. Despite market changes and cuts, we have coped pretty well by focusing entirely on providing value to all. Not simply saying we are a good thing, but being used. Our value for all strategy is clear, ensuring we are impartial, delivering must-watch UK content, and developing a world-class online offer, supported by ambitious commercial plans. Nearly 90% of adults and 75% of 16 to 34s, 75% of 16 to 34s, came to the BBC weekly, including last week, and every month nearly every adult uses us in the UK. These numbers have held up well. Over 30 million, actually 32 million browsers in the UK used the BBC online yesterday. The only online UK brand to really mix it with the global players. When it comes to hours of video watched in the UK, the BBC remains bigger than Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus combined. Editorially, we have wind in our sails. Award-winning shows from Time to Motherland, 9 million watched the launch of Frozen Planet 2, a peak audience of 17 million watched the Women's Euro final. Let's hope the men can replicate that. 42 million streams from Glastonbury. And the coverage of the Queen's funeral showed what only the BBC can do. More recently, in the first 7 days since launch, episode 1 of SAS Rogue Heroes had an audience of 6.5 million, compared with, dare I say, 3 million for episode 1 of the latest series of The Crown. We've grown BBC Sounds to over 1.5 billion listens, and in the midst of culture war storms and Twitter rage, the numbers of people saying we offer impartial news has held firm. Commercially, BBC Studios has grown rapidly in the last 5 years, delivering a stretching target of over 1.2 billion in returns and growing profits 70%. We also drove the UK economy. Our Across the UK plans are well underway and mean we're on target for 700 million of additional spend outside London by 2027-28. For example, we've announced 25 million of investment in the North East and a new Birmingham base in Digbeth, and we've moved news teams. We relocated 8 Radio 3 titles yesterday to Salford. And we continue to invest in unique and strong content in the nations and regions. At the same time, we've stepped up our commitment to a highly efficient BBC, fit to deliver maximum possible value. We've reduced our overhead rate to within 5% of our total costs. We cut over 1,000 public service roles last year. All our senior managers are assessed, and we're stripping away bureaucracy as we create a world-class culture. Overall, our progress over the last 2 years has been good. In many ways, thanks to the exceptional talent of the BBC, it has been gravity-defying. But looking to 2030, it is not enough. So now let's look to the future. Imagine a world that is internet only, where broadcast TV and radio are being switched off, and choice is infinite. There's still a lot of live linear viewing, but it's all being delivered online. Far from decline, could we actually harness the possibilities of this interactive digital landscape to increase public value and stimulate the UK media market, what would it actually take to deliver that? I think there are 4 choices that we need to make to give us a real chance of achieving success for the UK. They need urgent action. Namely, should we, as the UK, own a move to an internet future with greater urgency? Should we transform the BBC faster to have a clear market-leading role in the digital age? Should we proactively invest in the BBC brand as a global leader? And should we move faster in regulating for future success? Of course, the answer to these choices is yes. Now, I don't intend to answer every question you'll be pleased to hear in detail today, but let me outline some thoughts. Firstly, we must work together to ensure that everyone is connected and can get their TV and radio via the internet. This isn't something to resist. A fully connected UK has very significant benefits for society and for our economy. It would unleash huge opportunities for innovation. And for the BBC, internet-only distribution is an opportunity to connect more deeply with our audiences and to provide them with better services and choice than broadcast allows. It provides significant editorial opportunities. A switch off of broadcast will and should happen over time, and we should be active in planning for it. Now, of course, there is a bad way that this could happen, where access to content is no longer universal or is unaffordable for too many, where the gateway to content is owned by well-capitalized overseas companies. So we must close gaps and guarantee accessibility for all. Forecasts suggest that by 2030, about 2 million homes will still not be using fixed-line broadband, and even in a few years, 5% of the UK landmass may not be covered by 5G or 4G to provide content on the move. Now, I know that there is a renewed effort to drive this coverage by government and DCMS. This is critical. While the BBC cannot fund the build-out, it can collaborate with others to make a move to online attractive to all and play a big part in educating people about the transition. We will become more active as part of a coalition to make this happen. Let's all plan it flawlessly and leave no one behind and ensure that UK businesses and audiences get maximum benefit. In this new world, the next choice we need to make is to champion a clear market-leading role for the BBC. How will we inform, educate and entertain in 2030? The answer must be to differentiate and not copy. The BBC will focus its efforts on the following in the digital world: nurturing an informed society through impartial, trusted news and information, inspiring and supporting people of all ages with trusted knowledge and training, and engaging audiences with high-quality local British creativity from across the UK. Over time, this will mean fewer linear broadcast services and a more tailored, joined-up online offer. As an example, we will double down on the latest work in news on disinformation or accelerate the drive to ensure that network drama is sourced from across the UK, which differentiates us from others. We believe that if we drive this transition successfully, we can deliver universality despite a world of intense competition. We will achieve this not by creating derivative or niche content, but ensuring maximum relevance of our core output. To be clear, by universality, we mean 3 things which global players do not do. Namely, access, making sure all audiences in the UK can get to the BBC, that is essential. Relevance, making content that aims to appeal to all UK audiences, not just monetizable groups, critical. And engagement, reaching and being used by the vast majority of UK audiences. In future, we will need to transform the BBC faster to deliver a compelling online offer. We are working on how an IP BBC could be the best version of the BBC, shaped around people's interests and needs. a daily partner to your life, bringing the BBC together in a single offer with personalised combinations. A world in which local news, areas of interest and hidden gems can be found more easily. Digital offers a huge opportunity to unlock more audience value, but it requires big organisational change. A radical overhaul of how we use data, a heavyweight world-class tech team, new operating models, new creative solutions and ideas. Imagine news reimagined for the iPlayer, or increased functionality when you're watching the game online. We will be world-leading pioneers in this. No one in the world has created a digitally led public service media company of scale. And the global opportunity for us is there for the taking. Within the BBC, this means significant change. We will have fewer brands overall and consolidate more activity behind a simple, single brand in the UK, the BBC. And you'll see this globally as well. We will also simplify so-called sub-brands such as BBC News. You can see a first step in our bringing together of the news, BBC News Channel and BBC World News to one brand, BBC News. We'll share more plans in this area in the coming months. Now, inevitably, all this requires another choice, and that is to actively, dare I say happily, invest in the BBC. Any transition of a legacy broadcast organisation to a digital future needs capital. As the owner of even the biggest companies are finding out, have a look at the share prices, it is not for the faint-hearted, this transition. Moving to digital is not the challenge in of itself. Moving to digital while not losing most of your audience and burning millions of pounds unnecessarily is the challenge. In the BBC, we are very privileged to have the licence fee until 27-28. But if you take the period 2010 to 2028, we forecast the core funding for the BBC has been cut by a whopping 30%. Now, my key metric is providing great audience value for that fee. But others have been driving up pricing and pushing up media costs, reducing the BBC's ability to deliver great value. As we look to the 2030s, we are open-minded about future funding mechanics. But we are clear that it is critical that we need a universal solution that fuels UK public service growth, not stifles it, while offering audiences outstanding value for money. Of course, the latest settlement did include the increased debt facility for BBC Studios, which was welcome, and we are ambitious about its prospects. Alongside commercial plans, we will keep cutting costs to invest and attract more partner investment as well, such as the latest deal we announced with Disney and Doctor Who. But under the most ambitious scenarios, this will not change the need for serious public service investment. And in the short term, we will need more money to support the World Service to avoid further cuts, and we'll be discussing this with the FCDO. The Russians and Chinese are investing hundreds of millions, dare I say billions, in state-backed services. We have a choice to make. And we will also, of course, complement this World Service growth with ambitious plans for BBC Studios. The BBC is one of the most powerful and well-recognised brands on the planet, and we should be backing it. It's as simple as that. Lastly, we need to regulate at speed for success. This is not a new theme. It's no secret to anyone here that our legal and regulatory environment has not kept pace with the market. The Digital Markets Act, Online Safety Bill, Data and Digital Identity Bill, and the Media Bill planned for this Parliament are essential. We need rules for the prominence, availability, and inclusion of PSB content in new platforms in video and audio. Organisations providing content need the detailed data that will be the lifeblood of success in the new world. But it cannot be right. We have to wait years for legislation to recognise the change in our sector. So we need a regulatory framework that is proactive. It must be agile, able to respond without endless consultation and process. I am pleased that Ofcom is working in this area. Part of this is allowing the commercial arm to thrive and a regime that is ex post, not ex ante, responding to obvious harm when it occurs, not defining, because we've got a lot of bright people, not defining every possible negative outcome in advance and restricting UK innovation as a result. So in a summary, 4 choices for our future. Move to an internet future with greater urgency. Don't get dragged there. Transform the BBC faster to have a clear market-leading role in the digital age and be comfortable about that. Proactively invest in the BBC brand as a global leader, ambitiously, happily, and move faster in regulating for future success, urgently. Shaping the online future for the UK to work for all of us, to lead, not to follow, to grow. Thank you.
That was really meaty speech, Tim, so thank you very, very much for that. I'm going to start with one of the areas that you talked about, which is internet-only BBC, and wondered what you thought that would look like.
For the BBC?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I'd just say as reassurance in some ways is I think live linear is here for the long term. So there'll be streams. I mean, it's really important. The online BBC is not trying to replicate Netflix or not trying to replicate, Spotify. And one of the challenges, really interesting for public service broadcasting, I mentioned it, no one's doing this in the world, is how do you take those different genres, you bring them together. And I do think there's something, though, when I'm sitting finally at the end of the day collapsing and getting to a screen, or in the morning looking at my phone, how do you present the BBC as one offer, and you give live streams. So BBC One is a fantastic brand that does brilliant things. It's still vast. When England are playing in the semi-final, we'll be able to watch that live. So those moments are still there in the internet. What I do think happens is, and this is where I think we've really got to invest as the BBC, is that we've got to get an algorithm where you get the right degree of personalisation, but I want to know what the BBC Newsroom thinks the main story is, not just be wholly algorithmically driven, if you know what I mean. So we're going to have to get that. We're going to have tech capability to create our own solutions. What it enables you to do, as I mentioned in the speech, is just get far more value from us. I think most people who are fans of the BBC or care about us go, if only we knew about this. Or, my job, I get emails from, someone in radio going, you must listen to this, and I go, and the quality is outstanding. So some of the frustrations for the management and the senior team of the BBC is how do you get everyone to just get to stuff? So I think an internet BBC allows you to do that much faster. What it can't be is anything but flawed. It's got to be flawless in terms of the consumer experience or the audience experience. It can't, it's got to be utterly seamless. And final thing, really important point, it's got to be for everyone. And I think I think there are some really tough bits in terms of we've got to make sure that broadband is universally available and critically affordable. It's not the availability. I mean, DCMS are doing loads of work on pushing there's obviously questions about the final mile, as we always say in these transitions, but it's actually making sure it's affordable, because that's what really drives usage, by the way, pricing.
Yeah, so interesting point there about sort of the BBC recommendation engine, if you like, making sure that people are getting, if you like this, you like that. But one of the other challenges, which the BBC is already experiencing, if you like, which is perhaps one of brand attribution. So you've got a lot of young people who love BBC content, but they might have watched BBC-commissioned Peaky Blinders on Netflix, for example, and think, it's not produced by BBC, but they think it's a Netflix show.
Indeed.
And equally, so how do you solve for that? And that can only get worse in an online world. So how do you keep the trust that you need, the trust and reputation for what the BBC does in that distributed environment?
Once it doesn't need to get worse wholly. I mean, you've also got policy choices. So we are now selling not a lot of our secondary catalogue we're in the UK. So in the iPlayer service, by the way, there's some interesting things with regard to regulation and what the iPlayer, it was a 7-day, 30-day, you kind of had to get there in stages rather than going straight there and go, look, it's not just a catch-up service, it's a full video on demand service with all the box sets. So the first thing is you repatriate a lot of your content, because you're absolutely right, is the primary attribution is not for the producer. I know there's producers in the room and it's always galling. Can we have the logo at the front? But really,
should it be BBC original on it?
To be honest, it's all secondary. It's all secondary. You have a loyalty to a service. The BBC is the value the BBC delivers is both service and content. It's both. So we don't have a view. I do think it's a disaster if content is just pushed out into some people just publish it, put it out there, and everyone will get to learn it. We don't buy that. We believe in a curated service, within the power of editors. We believe in Mo Bakaya as the controller of speech radio saying, let me put together, and the serendipity of the BBC increases learning. All those things are wonderful. What I would say is, I do think, having said all that, active partnership and engagement with the TikToks, the YouTubes, so that our brand is out there. You've got content there, you're clearly incentivizing people coming back to the platform. But look, you can hear in my speech, I care deeply about democracy. We need to make sure quality BBC News is out there. With TikTok, we need to be partnering with people. But we need to do it part of what I'm talking about is we need to do it from a position of strength. The great thing about the BBC is we are the scale player in the UK. We can sit with TikTok and say, okay, how is this going to work in terms of a partnership? Yeah? And we are having those conversations. Whether it's news or Eurovision, where we're both deeply involved. So those partners, that we need to be in a situation where it is accretive to both of us. And that's fine. But what I wouldn't do is limit, I wouldn't try and dress the fact that there are risks if you don't get that attribution for a service. And we are ambitious. The ambition I'm talking about is definitely not giving up. I think we talk ourselves down. With 32 million people, adults in the UK, came to the BBC yesterday in the UK. Yeah, that's over half the adult population. We've got some scale to play with. Sometimes we're kind of hunched in this defensive crouch. We need to be more confident about our ability to partner with people. We're the biggest news brand in the world in terms of our reach now online, in terms of the latest, I saw some Press Gazette numbers where our numbers were way out and growing. So I don't want to get any swagger around that too much, but I just sometimes think we can talk ourselves into a niche when we don't need to.
So let's talk about funding, which you referred to, not surprisingly, in your speech. We've got the twin issues of a flat licence fee settlement and huge media inflation at the same time.
Yeah.
Don't know if that means you need to do less, which is problematic in an internet world. But how is that, especially?
Well, I think there's actually
you need a ton of you need it to be a massive aggregator of content to succeed in that IP world, which you clearly have. But how is the funding shape going to allow you to keep doing that?
Well, it's tough. It's really tough. And that's what I was saying, because the BBC is a difficult. You can look at it from different lenses, if you like, because we are. I mean this. We're very privileged to have the certainty of 27.28 a licence fee, 2 years flat, 4 years at CPI. There's commercial businesses out there that would definitely sign off on that in terms of the overall revenue of the core business. But there is no doubt that there's a number of enormous pressures. Obviously, there's inflation. There's the media, as you talked about, I'll just repeat what you're saying, the cost of production, the market's booming, so that is driving up price. And critically, our competitors are putting up price. They're driving price. And interesting, we clearly are appropriately linked to, a political process in terms of our pricing. But if you look at market, if you want people to value the BBC, we do have, there's clearly pressure. Some people would say, we've got loads of choice over here. But actually, if you look at the value, the vast majority of households at £13 a month, we're in the very good zone. If we're a commercial operation, we'd be leveraging price a bit bluntly. It's not what I'm intending. I think it's important. I do think as the BBC, our job is not simply to get the licence fee or whatever the funding mechanic is up. It's to offer great value. That's not for the vast majority of households and protect that universal mission. But it is I think what makes it really tough, by the way, is we have got a good record of driving deep efficiencies, thinking very hard about doing less. We are making slightly less content. But I think what I was saying in the speech and what the board, the BBC and others are really focused on is this cost of transition adds enormous pressure in this decade, every decade. So it's that capital requirement to build. I mean, the American tech companies have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people working in their tech departments. It's a very big choice to say we are going to take on that tech capability and build it. By the way, we're very reliant on rather brilliant people who take a massive discount in what they're paid to come and work for the BBC. That's true. We have tech people we've hired, and it's not all happiness on the other side of the fence, by the way. Might be good financial rewards, but the culture might be different. People do care about what I've just talked about. Most of the people working at the BBC are coming at a discount, particularly at the senior level, to say, we care. So we are in the game, but what you're saying is very true. It is really tough. The other thing about the BBC, of course, is you make any changes, it's kind of in the public eye. So some of us who worked in the commercial used to say, we'll close that area of the business. You know, we are making, dare I say, some relatively, I think, balanced moves in certain areas that people care about. And yeah, that is exhausting because everyone's got a view. I like that, by the way, in some ways, because it shows you people say, the worry for us is a lack of relevance and when people don't care. But that means for a management team to execute change fast, and as people who have worked in the BBC who know this only too well, it puts an added burden on their ability to get things done. So what I've talked about in the speech is a number of environmental, we'll call it, factors that lead to a lack of pace. And I'm worried about that because those factors don't affect others, whether it's access to capital, policy change, people. That is what I think, if you ask the BBC board, we've got a brilliant board now, is if you ask what they're most concerned about, I mean, it's ludicrous to think that we're not kind of obsessed with the change in the market. We're all over it. The issue is, can we get that? What's the pace of change? You've also got cultural change and taking brilliant teams from A to B and all that work. It's hard. So I'm not looking for sympathy. No. But yeah, no, it's hard.
So did you quite like, say, I mean, we were talking about CapEx and OpEx, as it were, two different things. So I guess the funding model, in a way, is your OpEx going on. Is that a German model, maybe, that Richard Sharp referred to in the culture section where the...
I think, what we've said is, I mean, you know which is we're open, beyond 27, 28, I think we need to be open. What we need to do is be very clear about the principles. We're not wedded to one particular... The licence fee's been reformed to include different things, and we need, what I'm saying is, we will need some very clear principles for our funding, which we've set out, or we have, and we need a mechanic that delivers against that, okay? And that's universal, by the way, independent of political interference on a day-to-day basis, kind of sacrosanct, that's non-negotiable, totally non-negotiable, a lot of nonsense talked about that, but utterly critical to us that we can report without fear or favour, and we own and we make that hard choice around impartiality. That's non-negotiable. The funding mechanic, there are funding mechanics that get you in the crosshairs of politics more, frankly, which is, you know, not something we want to see. There is it offering fair value to all audiences? Is it, you know, does it allow you sustainable finance? Because if you were doing annual settlements, can you imagine some of the things I've talked about trying to do that? So we've got clear principles. I think then we just have we're open-minded in having the discussion. What you can't do is, I think, simplistically say, oh, commercial will save you. I mean, under any scenario, if we triple the commercial, and we are flying, but you triple the bid, I mean, let's get into what I'd say is get into the detail, please. Get into the real numbers of operating this entity. We're a 5.3 billion turnover, sales turnover, but that is a mid to small scale operator in the global landscape at the moment. Okay, in the UK it's a big beast, but here it's a mid scale. What we have got, by the way, as per my speech, is a winning brand. And we've got creative and journalistic capability that is truly unparalleled. I was in Japan a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, our services are growing. People want trusted information. And we can, by the way, there are commercial opportunities for us in this, but they don't get you out of this issue, which is you've got to have broad-scale public funding. You cannot get out of that.
And you talked about the major sort of wealthy companies dominating this landscape over from you know, how big do you think that risk is on the current trajectory?
Did you get something out of the speech on that?
Yeah.
No, it's fairly significant. Look, the truth is, it's really interesting about in this balance, because I've said publicly, we're not there to beat Netflix. I like Netflix. I really respect these companies. They're great. We are not going to have everyone's media time. Some of the debate about so-called young people is ridiculous. You kind of talk to people, well, I'm not going to be I'm quite happy if someone's spending a lot of their time gaming, as long as they spend enough time with the BBC. That's already, and they say, we go there because we trust it. And by the way, we could be, in the future I'm thinking of, we could be providing BBC News in-game. You know, that's why I meant about editorial ideas. This whole, you know, do you want to get the football scores and a little, you know, bit of the BBC within fortnight? You know, you can think of 100 ideas editorially, where if you really went for it, you could see that development. That costs money, all these things. But I see us working alongside these companies. My speech was not about restricting their ability to operate, but it was about intervening on behalf of the UK in terms of protecting our IP. And by the way, there's a lot of, I think the conversation is a little bit mixed or fuzzy when we say, oh, it's great, it's all growth. But there is a difference between having, you know, studio facilities and owning IP. It's massive. And you know this, Theresa. It's like literally how much IP does the UK own? Where are our writers choosing to put their... Who owns the IP is a bigger question than who's operating the most effective shed at the moment. Those sheds are brilliant at delivering jobs, skills, apprenticeships, but they're not going to be the underpinnings of a creative industry or indeed a, you know, the tech, digital. It's about IP and ownership.
So I'm going to open it to the floor in a second, but quick question, well, probably not a quick question actually, on impartiality. You referred to that in your speech. We talked about it a couple of years ago. How, in terms of sort of getting the tone right, we're in an environment with, you know, increasing identity politics, divisions out there, addressing every view, employee activism. How do you manage that in your organisation?
I think the first trail, if we went back to the start, is part of the answer. It's a process. It's a clear statement of what we are as the BBC. You don't have to work at the BBC. If you come to the BBC, there are the editorial standards, and we judge you against it. We're clear on what we stand for. Yeah. It's utterly appropriate that we have, you know, staff networks, but they're not running the editorial guidelines. Look, is this a constant topic for every CEO of every organisation? Is it one of the defining things that people have had to wrestle with a lot? Of course it is. But the BBC, I think, when I came in, was very clear to make a choice that I could see media organisations, and you've seen it in the US, frankly, where you get, and this happens when you have to monetize return as well, because the more spicy the article, the more polarized you get, more view, you know, so it's actually quite, the clickbait issue is there. So, and you can monetize, you know, a big group of hardened opinion. We decided we didn't want to get drawn into, didn't want to go either way on that. And it's really, really difficult. By the way, it's not left and right. It's often just about groupthink issues or what you take as a given. I would say we're still wrestling with it. You know, we're still fighting our way through, you know, and sometimes we don't get it right, but we, overall, you know, take our political editor. He's very good. Yeah. And he is genuinely going out there in a curious way on our behalf, trying to find out what's going on. And the other thing with Deborah Turness, who's outstanding, coming to run the news operation, is I think she talks a lot about just being more transparent about our process. I have a weird view that the more you'd see, if you came and sat in and saw the BBC operating, you'd be impressed. Because our staff and our teams really do want to get to the story. And that's not to say we don't need to make sure we're hiring from a broad base of people, we're creating the right inclusive, but I really believe in that. And I do worry, you know, I worry about, obviously, about groupthink in an organisation like ourselves. Any establishment organisation of that type has those risks. But the targets we've set to reform the organisation in that regard, we're doing pretty well.
Any questions for... quite a few questions.
Okay, I'm going. Let's go.
Gentleman in the...
Hiya. Very good, thank you.
Perfect. Yes, just on the World Service, you sort of mentioned that you'd be speaking further about this, but can you give us some more detail on the extent of the threat? You know, are we talking about compulsory layoffs? And what is the kind of intervention you'll be asking for?
I'm not going to go further than the speech, in as much as we have said that. It's interesting, by the way. I mentioned I saw some numbers that, you know, RT. If you take all of our language services, our English, RT as a state-backed service is getting more funding. Yeah. The current World Service is funded by. We fund at least 254 million within the licence fee, but we're actually funding more than that. Okay, and then we've got 94 million from FCDO and government funding. With the scale of what we're facing, we can't continue to, if you like, over-invest versus our commitment in the World Service. So that means we have to make some choices. I think we've made some sensible choices already, which you'll have seen, where we've said we're not going to be on shortwave radio here, we're going to focus on online and television and protect our reach and our services. We haven't closed a language service, but I think with the financial pressures we're under and what we have to be reasonable about what someone in Penrith or Perth is paying for, we have to look for more government support in the coming months, and we'll be having those discussions. I can't go further than that at this point.
Thank you. Angela Ferreira, actually, I know who you are, but if people could say who they are as well when they ask, that would be lovely.
Hi, thanks for that, Tim. Angela Ferreira from Douglas Road Productions. Over the years, the BBC has cut or vastly reduced Community Programmes Unit, Disability Programmes Unit, Asian Programmes Unit, African Caribbean Unit, along with the lack of original commissioning for BBC4, which also touches on some of that. And now the cuts to local radio, particularly in the evening. Can you explain to us more about how some of those underserved audiences will be served in the future? And also what will happen to that pipeline of creativity, which has given so much to the BBC and the other creativity that's going to go?
Yeah, I'm very proud of our record in terms of how we've commissioned from a very diverse base, much more than any, other operation in the UK. I would say, I mean, by the way, on the local radio, we are in consultation. So, and I don't want a result of that consultation to be that we're seeing, big reductions in the areas you're talking about. More broadly, I've got a marginal defensive twitch on what you're saying, because I think if you look at the funding we put into, the special funds we put together in terms of investing in different types of content run by diverse leaders. I think if you look at the rewiring of the core of the BBC, we are fundamentally different in terms of on-screen portrayal, but also those companies that we're now commissioning. We put in this guideline, which we're saying, 20% from, protected characteristics to produce. So my view is that one is we're still producing thousands of hours of content. So yes, we've cut a lot, but we're still extremely broad. So if you go, as I do, out in the nations, you go to Birmingham, all those places, we see things like the Asian network as utterly critical and precious. I still think if you look at our World Service provision in terms of languages, BBC Africa, I mean, there's a lot going on. I mean, the investment is still very, very significant. In some ways, those have not been impacted as much as I could argue some of the areas like more mainstream daytime television. And our cuts have not been pushing in that area. But I do think the proof is in the pudding. We should look at I'd be happy to sit with you and talk about the data a little bit, because it's the core output. It's who is actually making the core drama, the major strands. That is when we'll know we've really got to be a more diverse, inclusive broadcaster, not being contentious that just the initiatives on. I know that we need a broad base, and I know the BBC4 issue. The BBC4 issue is a little bit bluntly about funding. I don't think it's designed to affect, if you like, minority audiences. It's everyone being affected by that, and I think everyone gets affected equally by that, I think. I think we've got a good record, actually, but it's worth, I'm happy to talk more about that.
Paddy Barwise.
Hi, Paddy.
Thank you very much. Paddy Barwise from London Business School. And I mean, Theresa raised this, both the first two questions, it keeps coming back to the money. The big threat to the BBC is to do with the money. And you've made a good case for public investment. You've made a good case for aggressive digital transformation, which requires more investment. At the same time, we've seen these massive cumulative cuts since 2010. At some point, surely the elastic is going to break. You've said all options are on the table. When can we expect an announcement about whether you're going to have to shut down some major services in order to bridge the gap? You said rightly that, I mean, the overheads can't be ground down much further. Commercial can't bridge the gap. Surely you're going to have to make an announcement maybe next year.
No, my point, Paddy, sorry, not necessarily in terms of, I think you're shopping for a cliff edge. Yeah, if that's a sentence. What I said was a couple of things. One is, I think under any scenario, I worry that there's not some of the bigger conversation here is, are we okay for the long term into the 2030s for a big intervention of the scale we're at now to protect public service broadcasting? So, but hold on.
It's not sustainable as things stand.
Well, my view is that because what's it in that sentence? Sorry.
Well, the heavy investment in digital, okay, and in content and services for younger audiences, while maintaining the range and quality of existing services, seems to me non-sustainable.
Well, I think it requires a couple of things. One is it requires that public investment to be maintained. The big picture, Paddy, is if you look across the world, public service broadcasters are often being moved to a market failure model, as you know, and not able to raise the kind of revenue we're raising from something like a license fee. That's the really big point. Then you've got an additive thing, which is the commercial arm doesn't stop you from needing that.
Absolutely.
Right. But enabling the commercial arm with debt, being able to operate fast, being unrestricted to a degree in terms of what we can do in terms of our opportunities, does enable us actually to attract capital and partnerships and do the things we do, which I believe has a material effect. So if you've got those two things working, there'll be massive strain, but we believe we can maintain universality and scale in the UK. That's the answer to your question, all right? Now, that doesn't mean there won't be... And just one thing I would say is not everything that we change is about a cut. It may be a choice by management not to do something and focus on another area. Not everything is driven by, to be fair, the licence fee framework. Now, if the exam question is, with 5.3 billion of revenue, can we do it? In the short term, I think it's very hard, but not impossible. But we will need all the things I've talked about. We need a fair wind on regulation. We need access to capital. We've got 750 million, but we need fast ability to do partnerships, to work, to build the commercial arm rapidly. All those things allow you to navigate a path that's incredibly tough. The other thing I'll say is you then need to agree that some of the changes in terms of making the iPlayer competitive, all those things have to be done at speed. The problem is it's not just money. Money is critical. It's speed, approvals, all of that. So, and I think that what I'm saying is that I'm slightly more optimistic that we can deliver universality if we're given the support that I've talked about to do it.
Thank you. Would you...
I'll try and make
in the red.
We'll do quick fire.
Hi, Tansy. I'm an RTS member. Just really interesting listening to your speech just then, because the key differentiator between you and all the other platforms, Netflix, Disney Plus, etc., is you're also acting as the UK Centre of Broadcast Excellence, which is a completely different job to just producing programmes and just perpetuating that. So in a way, on the funding model, you're being funded to do the programme stuff and do the broadcasting, but you're also it's almost free riding on your as a centre of excellence. So things like regulators like the BSI get funding. I think maybe missing a trick in actually saying that you're broadcast centre of excellence and actually playing a role in that regulation and actually looking at things like setting standards for accessibility to broadband across the UK, about access to networks, because I think that's how John Reith started. He started by creating the broadcast infrastructure in the UK. So do you think you're missing a trick by not actually playing off?
I think it's an excellent point. I think it's something we should do, and we do to an extent. Maybe I could have said a bit more on that, but in terms of standards for, I might call the platforms, radio player in cars, we're doing right. I mean, I needed some convincing on that. Actually, the car manufacturers are going to take that as a standard for radio in cars. So agree, we just need to do more of it.
One more question, it's got to be quick.
Andrew Eborn, Octopus TV. Great speech, congratulations, 100 years. We had a discussion with Greg Dyke a couple of weeks ago about what's going to happen with the next 100. As you say, one of the key essences of the BBC is the fantastic brand, and they talk about trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Big challenges about trust and impartiality. You also had David Dimbleby saying that the BBC was scared to criticise the monarchy. Could you tell me what steps you're taking to address both of those?
We're taking enormous steps to ensure that people understand what impartiality means, due impartiality, and fairness and balance. And we're doing a lot of, I mean, I could go into the reviews we've done. Nick Sirota, who's on the board, did a review where we're driving a big plan against impartiality, improving the training, doing the thing, because it has to be actively managed. Like you have to make a decision, you can't drift. So we're doing an enormous amount internally to do that. And the request to the BBC journalists is really clear. Stick to the standards, but report without fear or favour. And, you know, everyone has we could fill a book with people's view on how we're doing in terms of that and mistakes we've made and this, that and the other. But overall, I think we're in a good position. And I respect the views of various people in terms of where they sit. I think we're navigating the course pretty well. But it requires active management. And it requires, I mean, the idea we are in any way weak on this, I think is frankly just wrong. We're pretty, I mean, you know, if you don't do my job if you want a popularity badge from anyone.
Thank you, Tim. I've got a final question, and I think we've got to wrap. So we've got to. But what is Christmas viewing going to be like in the Davie household? Because we saw a lovely set of shows
Bit of sport. But I've got to catch up on stuff. I mean, Happy Valley season 3. Yeah, people actually applauding the announcement. I've never had that before, but there's something about that show that's going to be right. And I hear good things. I get getting behind on box sets because I'm currently halfway through the English. Who's watching it? English is must watch if you like that kind of thing. It's stunning, so I've got to get that done. I've got a couple of comedies. I've got bits and pieces, and then I've got a couple of movies. You know, I tend to go back to, you know, this. I never get a chance to watch a movie really. So at Christmas I'll just vegetate and hope the phone doesn't ring.
Excellent.
Great.
Excellent. Tim.
There's a few people in the room who do ring my phone, so yeah, that's a request. The phone's gone in the pocket for me. Yeah, great, good.
Tim, thank you for such an insightful conversation speech. Utterly, lots of food for thought there, and thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
Yeah.
Thank you.